Hello everyone, welcome back to Keeping Up the Chaldeans. I'm Anthony Toma, your host, and today we're here with Roy Gessford from Let in the Light Publishing. Thank you for joining us, Roy. Today we're going to learn a lot about history, writing, and you're going to hopefully give everyone out there in YouTube land the little nudge to get them to get it out of the brain and onto paper. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
For sure. Do you want to start off by just introducing yourself, giving you a little bit of background about yourself, and then get into what Let in the Light Publishing is?
Sure, I would be happy to. Again, my name is Roy Gessford, and I'm with Let in the Light Publishing. It's a company I started in 2012. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to college in San Diego, but I didn't realize that Chaldeans existed until I went to seminary and started learning the ancient languages. And after I had taken biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek, I was told that that Aramaic was still alive. I have to preface this by saying the books that I had read at the time and the professor who'd been at there for 40 years and was a Yale graduate, I asked him, did you know Aramaic is still a spoken language? And one of the most learned men in our country, he said, no, I had no idea.
Oh, geez.
And the books all said that this was a dead language and that the speakers of it didn't exist. So I had just moved everything to go to seminary, and quite frankly, I wanted to go a little deeper. And when I learned that Aramaic was still spoken, I dropped everything. I was told I needed to move to San Diego again. Wow. And because I had done my undergraduate there, I just packed the bags and drove. And in between that, I had had a career as a tennis coach. And when I finished seminary, the idea came to write a book on tennis. And I mentioned God in it, so I knew most of the major publishers wouldn't touch it. So I started my own company, and then when I moved to San Diego, my professor, Father Michael, said, Roy, would you be willing to be my publisher? And he'd been teaching classical Aramaic, so around the time of Jesus, and then spoken Aramaic, the modern, for 32 years. He taught at KUWTC College. Was one of the only professors in the world
What's his
teaching
name again?
that. His name is Father Michael Bizzi.
Okay.
The Americans call him Bazzi, but once I got to know him, I realized he was a very busy man.
Busy.
and the vowel, I think it goes with busy.
Yeah. Okay, so continue.
Well, after I started being in his class for a while, I was the only American, surrounded by 25 or 30 Chaldeans or Iraqis, and they were from different villages. And what had really drawn me to his class was the language. And I realized that Aramaic was not a homogeneous language, that over the centuries, the millennia really, the thousands of years, it had changed forms. And I got the opportunity, I was at the Society for Biblical Literature conference, which was in 2014 in San Diego, and I received a scholarship, an opportunity to do a master's. And I ended up writing my master's on preserving the Chaldean Aramaic language. Wow. And I had stakeholders from all over the world. I had from Cambridge, Dr. Jeffrey Kahn. And Dr. Kahn has an audio bank of Chaldean dialects, over 150 dialects.
Really?
And I would be in Father Michael's class, and he would say, the word for such and such is this, and 3 hands would go up and say, no. In my village it's this.
Yeah.
And so I realized that, this was how precious it was. It still wasn't uniform, and that Americans had no record of this language. It was a bit of a secret. So it was very exciting to be in on this secret.
Yeah.
And then when Father Michael asked me to be his publisher, I said, sure. And I said, what language? Because that language dialect did not exist on the keyboard. All his books had been handwritten.
Wow.
And so I took on a project that I didn't realize how much work was going to be taken into getting into.
Handwritten in Aramaic?
Handwritten in Aramaic, yeah. He had written the books himself.
Okay.
George Kiras, in the 80s, who is a well-known publisher, had come up with a typeset for that. And so it was done by typewriter or early on the computer, but it was not a language that was inherently on the computer.
Wow.
Yeah, and so again, as my knowledge started to grow and as I started writing this master's thesis, I ended up working with a Sumerian professor from Yale, Dr. He is a Korean gentleman, a very wonderful guy, and then Dr. Errico out of Georgia, Yona Sabar, who is from Zaho and is a professor at UCLA, his son Ariel wrote a great book called My Father's Paradise.
Okay.
So kind of right off the bat, I got in with this tremendous group of interfaith, geographically diverse, geographically unique group of people, and they were willing to guide me in my study on where the Aramaic language came from and how it can be preserved today.
And these are a multitude of ethnicities also that were kind of gravitated towards the Aramaic language.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've been trying to encourage Americans to learn about what Aramaic is and things like that, and I keep running into brick walls. That the Chaldeans don't go around telling Americans they speak this language isn't surprising to me, because a lot of the pastorate they all have language degrees in Greek, and if you say no, we have Aramaic now they have to go back and learn Aramaic.
Oh, geez.
It kind of undoes some of their learning, and at most of their stages in their career, they're not very happy about that. So it presents challenges for a lot of people to kind of say, oh, by the way, and I read the Sermon on the Mount in Aramaic every Sunday. This exists, and so it just is. It's a secret topic, but when you really get around these people, first of all, they're very passionate about their language, and there's a little controversy around it, of course.
What does that mean to linguistic people or scholars in the language realm? Like what because of the existence of the spoken Aramaic, what does that do to their world?
Well, for instance, I'll just give an example. I had the academic credentials to look at Harvard and possibly go pursue what I thought would be Chaldean Aramaic or some sort of Aramaic at Harvard. And when I approached the head of the language department, he said, no, not a good time to come study with us. And so it's easier for them to just kind of say, we don't have that in our department. And nobody does. I just got back from Princeton Theological Seminary and Yale, and when you look at their collections of books, they have Akkadian and Syriac, and then these other languages. And there are no books on Chaldean Aramaic. So many of them start picking up their books from us, even though we're a smaller publisher, because we're one of the very few companies in the world that can actually claim to be publishing in Aramaic.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a burgeoning field. So anybody that's listening that can speak the language realize they have a huge leg up in becoming a scholar in this area over everybody else. Plus they can get the history and the language correct. So it's kind of a golden opportunity for people within the Chaldean community to own their own language and really, share it with the larger community. It's a unique time in history.
So you mentioned your first publishing was your book.
Yeah,
and then
yeah. My first book was on tennis. The Stanford coach wrote it. He wrote the foreword. Coach Gould won 17 national championships, more than any other coach in the history of NCAA. And I went to him, and he's a great coach, a great person. And I said, would you write the foreword for my book? Within 24 hours, he said, I'm happy to write it. I've read every word. I love it. Yeah. And so he and I ended up playing against some of his players when he was, and they were just phenomenal. But the main thing was they had a unity that was very unique. Yeah. And I tried to mirror that in my teams when I was coaching high school for over 25 seasons. And so when I finished that career of coaching, the idea came to me, how many books on sports that are really evolved around ethics and the reason you play sports in the first place exist? And when I researched it in tennis, nobody had ever written a book for high school tennis coaches before. Yeah. Nick Bollettieri, who was Agassi's coach, had written something that was kind of close, but he wasn't a high school tennis coach. Yeah. And so when I wrote this, I put it out to the general public, and it ended up doing very well. And this brings up a very interesting point. I mean, as Chaldeans and as writers, you want to write what you're passionate about. How I started my YouTube channel, and you know the nuts and the bolts better than anyone else, or whatever why I love making dolmas. Anna Shockey has a wonderful poem about her grandmother who would make these dolmas. And these are things that, if you're passionate about it, writing is easy. Yeah. If you're in it for the other reasons, writing can be very difficult. There's surveys out there that most writers don't like their jobs. And so I always take on projects that I enjoy, that interest me. And this one especially interested me because I realized the world needed this book. As we went into high money, high profile sports, that's not why people got into this in the first place. This was the sport of kings in England, and it was to learn values, to learn ethics, to learn to be a gentleman, win or lose, or a lady, win or lose.
Yeah.
And so these were, that was my first book. Thanks for asking.
Gotcha,
and
for sure.
Just kind of a sweet journey. But Father Michael used to be a volleyball coach.
Okay.
And so when I was in his class and he asked me to get some books, I said, Father Michael, by the way, I'll share my book on tennis with you. And he read it. He said, did you know I used to coach volleyball? I said, no. And he said, well, I did, and actually I'd like you to publish my language books. And I have a few other books as well. So the first book was Tilkepe, which in Arabic was his master's thesis, and I did an English version that I thought would be very discreet. So I put it in gray, I put Tilkepe on the side, English only, and it just was kind of a, by the way, it is an open secret, but this is something sacred to these people. And so when Americans get this, they look at it and they go, it must be important, and so that was one of the first books. And
so this is his book translated into English?
Which he did originally. Yeah, he did that I think he wrote it in 68 and translated it in English by 74 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he wrote a sequel. And the goal is to get the people from the different villages, whether it's Tilkepe or Alkosh or wherever they may be from, to write the history of the villages in English.
Yeah.
Because these things may exist in Arabic, but the American general public has no concept of it. And so this one has some wonderful photos. The unique thing about this is he wrote it in 3 languages. So he wrote this in modern Aramaic, in Chaldean, Surith if you want to call it.
Yep.
He wrote it in Arabic, and then he wrote it in English. And it's got some wonderful photos, but he would have people in the classroom saying, Father Michael, what was it like in the homeland?
Yeah.
And he would start telling him, and then he realized, why don't I just put this in a book?
Wow.
So it's a year of the village, of what village life was like in Tilkepe.
What year was this?
2021.
Oh, this is brand new.
Brand new.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Gotta read that one. Gotta pick a book.
Well, and the other thing is how many books these days are written in Surith.
Yeah.
Over 90% don't read and write the language, so that people are producing books in Aramaic is a major step forward.
That's cool. So your goal today is to encourage Chaldeans to write a book on anything that they're passionate about.
Yeah.
So that way it's not a chore, it's a pleasure.
Yep.
To get it out of your head, put it on paper, and you'll help them publish it?
Sure. Yeah, I would love. If I don't publish it myself, I know people in the industry that can help them publish it. Or there are many venues to publishing. It used to just be one way to publish a book. Now it's wide open.
What's the business side of the publishing for anyone out there that wants to kind of get into that space?
Well, I think it's important to realize most books don't make money.
Yeah.
If you're not passionate about it, you want to be aware that there's a cost associated in putting a book together, and then your general audience are the ones that are going to buy the book and put it together and make it financially successful.
Gotcha.
There are certain things that go with being a writer that are wonderful. We have a writers' conference coming up.
Yep.
This is at the second annual at Beth Narain, and none of these people wrote because they wanted to make money. They were passionate about their subject. They're all Mesopotamians, and they are writing to share their history, to share their love. And it's at the Chaldean Community Foundation on November 11th from 10 to 2.
Okay.
And within academia specifically, but on the bookshelves as well, there are very few books written by Chaldeans.
Yeah.
When I went to Sterling's in West Bloomfield the other day, I looked at it. Do you have any books on Chaldeans? We have one. It was one of Jacob Bacall's books. He's got 3 now. And so, can I see it? Just because a lot of times they'll say we have one, but it turns out they don't.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have the one called Chaldeans in Detroit.
Yeah.
They had a different one. So, let me see it. Well, it turns out the woman at the front desk was Chaldean.
Oh.
Yeah, she said, well, how come you're so interested? I said, well, I run a writer's conference. I'm a writer. I love writing, and so Chaldeans are historically, are very intellectual, very cerebral, very spiritual people. And to put their stories in English where we have freedom of the press, this is something that can be done.
Yeah.
It's one of the great things about our country. And so my goal is to, whether Let in the Light Publishing publishes those stories specifically, but to guide those people through the process of putting their book out to the public. Because writing is therapeutic, and quite frankly, the United States could use some sort of healing, therapeutic, well-written books from a historical perspective that kind of say, well, we went through this 2,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago. America is at 235, or whatever the age of the country is. They're kind of like a young teenager at some level, where they're very confident and they have a lot of enthusiasm, thinking they're right, but they really don't have much life perspective.
Right.
And Chaldeans bring that perspective, and this is one of the reasons specifically that I think Chaldeans must write. Yeah.
For sure. So let's get back to the conference, since it's coming up November 11th. It's a Saturday. How do people get tickets to this event?
It's going to be in person and on Zoom. So anyone from all over the world can watch it. We put it at 10, so whether they're on the West Coast or the East Coast or wherever. The Chaldean Community Foundation, the registration opens October 23rd.
Okay.
So go to their website and register.
And can you just read off the presenters or the names of the authors that are going to be in?
Sure. We held it last year, and it was a pretty tight-knit group. It was kind of all Detroit Chaldean writers.
Okay.
And I think Wiam Namu is kind of the co-founder of this with myself. And we thought, why don't we broaden this a little bit? So we met with Dr. Sava Yaqub, who's a physician, retired physician from Windsor, Canada.
Okay.
We thought, aha, a Canadian voice in the mix. And he's a poet. As I mentioned last year, we had Anna Shaki as a poet, and so to bring in different genres within the conference was important. So Dr. Yaqub will speak on poetry. Wiam, of course, brings the female element, and she's written a book, Mesopotamian Goddesses, on the history of how females have affected Chaldean society. Very unique book. She'll present on that. Saad is a journalist. He writes on genocide. He's actually Yazidi. And has a perspective that I've read some of these articles are very much appreciated because it's from within. It's not a reporter from the outside writing on a conflict between different tribes. As someone who's been part of this community, he has a very unique perspective. Dr. Miri, Adid Miri, he's in the Chaldean News. He's 2 or 3 articles every time. I recently, he has a great series on basically where the diaspora pushed Chaldeans. So he had an 8 series on Europe. He had 3 series on Australia. He had 5 on the States. So kind of a 13 series article on where Chaldeans are these days. Very beautiful.
Yeah.
Habib is a historian's historian. I mean, this conference was meant for him. He's going to tell the Chaldean exodus around the time of the 7th century BCE. So just kind of, a very scholarly approach to it. And we need that in the conference. We have a few different things.
Okay.
And I travel the world giving talks on the Lord's Prayer and encouraging writers from whatever faith to start writing. So I'm going to speak about some of my experiences in Japan. And of course, history, even if you go online, it will say, well, Chaldeans never made it to Japan. They made it to China. There's a stela in Beijing that dates back to the 700s. I found a shrine in Kyoto that dates back to roughly the 4th century that has a baptismal pool and was supposedly created by Nestorians. Nestorians is a lump word for Chaldeans and Assyrians as well. But the actual physical history was there, and I ended up teaching Aramaic Chaldean at the university at Doshisha, at one of the older universities there. And the professor who brought me in said, we can't really publicize this because it goes against modern history, but the Chaldeans made it to Japan. I was like, really? Wow, that's a new piece of information.
Yeah.
And I have some great photos, and I think I've been to maybe 25 different cities within the United States, and just the reception to where Chaldeans in the world, as perceived by most Americans, are today is I will share on some of these and just encourage Aramaic speakers. And the Chaldean Community Foundation has Assyrians, Mandaeans, Syrians, a number of different Aramaic speakers. So I broadened my topic to include everyone this year.
So all of this information that you're gathering and all of this history, why isn't it in a book written by you?
There are enough books written by people from the outside on people on the inside.
Okay.
And this is, I get this all the time from people. Roy, you know the Chaldean, you know the Aramaic. Why don't you write a translation of the Bible?
Yeah.
The last thing we need is, I hate to say it this way, another white American male writing a book on what they think the Bible says.
So why don't you ghostwrite it for me, and I can look like a genius?
That's where publishing comes in. Awesome. That's where publishing comes in, and that is what I'm trying to do. And so we can talk afterwards.
Excellent. No, I'm totally kidding about that. No one would believe I was that smart. What else do we have here with these other books?
Well, we have the one thing, one of the reasons that I came on the show, and I'm very grateful for this, and I'm assuming your audience is global?
Yeah, well, maybe one or two people tune in, but it can be.
Okay, I mean, anybody
we have the capability.
Anybody can look on YouTube and find it. So it'll get out there at some point. But Chaldeans have one of the most unique histories of any tribe in the world. But they can't all agree on their own history. And as a historian, before I present this to Americans saying Chaldeans did this, this, and that, I need the Chaldeans themselves to say, yeah, we agree, we did this, this, and that. Because it would look very poor if somebody within my company or myself wrote something and then Chaldeans themselves said no.
Yeah.
And so I don't mind that there's some controversy among the Middle Eastern tribes and Mesopotamian tribes about who did what when. This is okay with me, but we need to bring the facts forward. The word history is composed of two words, his story.
Yeah.
And under Nebuchadnezzar, it was the Chaldean story. They were writing history as they went. But history took many interesting turns for the Chaldeans, both before and after. And these are the things, Father Michael is writing this from essentially within the church perspective, which is not the only perspective that exists, but to me, it's a very valuable perspective. And so if the priests, if the bishops read this and they say, we all agree on this. And then the general public says, well, we agree with this or not.
Yeah.
At least we have a starting point. So this has numerous maps. The gentleman that designed the Chaldean flag was kind enough to share some of his early
renderings,
maps here. Yeah, maps. I mean, these are things from a Chaldean perspective. To write a map on the Chaldean location is different than anyone else in history. And so, if you agree or disagree or whatever, at least it's a Chaldean perspective on this is what Mesopotamia looked like.
Gotcha.
From that point and a language standpoint, history is not that difficult to trace.
Yeah. So when was this Chaldean Nation book published?
2022.
Okay, so this is brand new too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So this is the most recent illustration, the most recent documented Chaldean book, basically, on the history of Chaldeans.
Yeah, but we've got somebody like Habib who's going to be in the book, Hanona, who has it in Arabic.
Okay.
And he has a recently published book, but it hasn't been translated into English yet.
Gotcha.
There are a number of people who are writing who are in the process, and so the goal is to share this. I mean, there's being a book written on the history of the Chaldean Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Jacob Bacall is working on that. And so, we were not sure on some facts, and so rather than calling Father Michael, we were just able to open his books and say, oh, St. Peter opened, on this date, and he's the person that opened it. So I think we've got that specific aspect of San Diego, history correct.
So you want to get everyone to agree on a language or a history or a path. What venue or forum or vehicle are you going to use to get the stamps from the public, the church, the general? I mean, everybody. Like, how are you going to bring that all together?
Well, as I said, I travel the world, and I speak specifically on Chaldeans and Aramaic. And so I just got back from Chicago, and I met with the Chaldean Education Center there. And they said, we would love to read these books and see how it works for us. I have plans to go to Australia. I'll do the same thing there. So I'm a word of mouth guy. The computer existed at about sixth grade is when the computer came into my life. And I learned at a very young age to look someone in the eye is very different than to send them an email.
Yeah.
And when it comes to something as precious as one's history and language, I like having one-to-one conferences. I don't do social media, but I do interviews with people who, are very endowed in that subject. And so my goal is to share these and then let those that are interested figure out a way to get to it, rather than saying, this is me, this is mine, and I'm telling you what I think.
Yeah.
That's not the goal of this. The goal is, if you're interested in writing a history of your village, write it, we'll share it with the community. If you have questions on language, look into it and share it with us, because this history is really being written in English for the first time.
Yeah. So these books are published. Are there going to be edits to these, or is there going to be a collective next book?
The truth is, I don't know.
Okay.
These books don't need to be edited.
Okay.
They're done deals.
Okay.
The language books, you have. Do you read and write Chaldean at all?
I don't, not at all.
Well,
no.
in each of these books, you have these things, but the vowels, the vocalization marks, the dots around the letters, were not added until much later. And so in our early books that we have on the classical, this is Father Michael taught for over 30 years teaching classical Aramaic. And in the early Aramaic, there were no vocalization marks or vowel marks around the letters.
So how do people know to sound them out?
Well, that's why there's 150 dialects to this day of difference, is because it was getting too regional. The Hebrew language, the Jews did the same thing. Both Semitic languages, very similar. There was beginning to be too much discrepancy. And when it came to the holy text, you really couldn't have so much discrepancy among, because the words vary. You still have rope and camel, and it's the difference of a dot here or there. And so to get uniformity, and so in order for the language books, will we get every dot? I'm still, every once in a while, get an email from Father Michael, we must change this now, Roy. I'm like, can we wait 6 months and do them all at one time? So we're close. They're fully teachable. I would consider them accurate, but I'm constantly giving them to scholars and saying, is there anything in this book that you don't agree with? Because to get an extra perspective on something as sacred as this, but as complex as this also. So the language books, this is book 2, the sequel to book 1. Obviously, we've got the lion on both. But because our biggest followers on this language were Assyrians, we put in Assyrians, and the foreword we put in a foreword by a Jew, because those are the 3 groups that are most interested in preserving classical Aramaic. The Babylonian Talmud, one of the most important documents in Jewish history, is written in Chaldean Aramaic. So these are, tools to help people learn that language.
Where can someone find these books if they wanted to purchase them?
Well, at the conference, we'll have a table there. Otherwise, we're on all the major distributors all over the world, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those carry them. Or the number one thing would be our website, because we get to develop a little bit.
What's the website?
The website is letinthelightpublishing.com.
Letinthelightpublishing.com.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there anything we didn't touch on that we need to?
Well, I would like to share just a little bit on the differences of some of the books. So we have the classical Aramaic, which is also this one, and it does go back to the time of Christ. The language has gone through at least 6 different lingual stages. So as the oldest spoken language by mankind, and those in Tamil would say ours is equal or whatever, I have to mention that, but there are not very many languages at all that can say this length of time, the language has changed over time. So words like liba, well, that's an ancient word. It may even be the same in Acadia, but it's also the word used today. And so some of the words haven't changed, and then some of them have.
Does that mean heart?
Part. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so, do you speak the language Aramaic?
Well, my written classical is good. I can translate pretty much the entire New Testament. I'm still working on the Old Testament.
Okay.
When it comes to Surah, I took Father Buzzy's modern Aramaic class, is what they call it. And so
It's written, read, and speak.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
And of course you have to recite in front of the class.
Yeah, yeah.
And so here I am, and he was nice enough to choose on me last, but when I had to speak the language of the Chaldeans in front of a bunch of Chaldeans, there was a little pressure, you know, and I got an ovation. They all clapped afterwards. But the intermediate, I got through this class as well, and you know, at the time, I didn't realize I was going to be the publisher for this book.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, this book's too hard, you know, this and that. And then when he said, will you be the publisher? I said, sure. And so we tried to soften it up. We added a gentle cover. You know, we've got the Euphrates on there, and then Hammurabi on the first one, just to add some perspective on the significance that if one is struggling with the languages, it's worth it. You know, I mean, this is...
Now, are these books in the Chaldean Cultural Center?
They are.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and they're also at the Chaldean Community Foundation. Both of those groups have picked up copies of all our books.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us.
Sure.
I hope it was beneficial to you. I know it was to the audience for sure. Much success out there, and everybody head out to the conference November 11th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. At the Chaldean Community Foundation.
It's on Zoom.
On Zoom.
If you make it in person, there'll be free food.
How does someone get an invitation on Zoom?
Go to the Chaldean Community Foundation and there's a link.
Okay. All right, awesome. Thanks for joining us.
you.
We appreciate your time.
Okay.